My name is Evelyn, and I'm 44 years old. The day my daughter told me she was getting married, I felt both joy and dread all at once. It's strange how emotions can mix like oil and water, excitement bubbling at the surface, and fear sinking deep below. When Clara called me that morning, her voice was almost trembling with happiness. "Mom," Erin proposed, she said, and for a second, my heart swelled. I wanted to cry, to celebrate, to hold her like when she was a little girl showing me a school medal. But the warmth didn't last long. Something in her tone, distant, formal, even reminded me that she wasn't the same little girl anymore. Somewhere along the line, our bond had changed, and I didn't know why. I raised Clara alone after my husband, Michael, left us. She was only 6 then, too young to understand what abandonment meant, but old enough to feel its effects. I tried my best to fill both roles, mother and father, juggling 2 jobs and a constant ache in my chest that never really went away. Back then, Clara was my shadow. We'd cook dinner together, laugh over silly movies, and promise we'd always be each other's safe place. She was my reason for pushing through the hardest years of my life. But as she got older, something shifted. Maybe it was high school, maybe it was college, or maybe it was just the natural distance that comes when children grow into their own identities. Still, there was a coldness that hadn't been there before, small remarks, half-hearted hugs, calls that grew shorter and less frequent. I kept telling myself it was normal. After all, every mother has to let go eventually. But even when she came home for holidays, I could sense that something about me embarrassed her. When she first told me about Aaron, I wanted to meet him right away. She said he was kind, ambitious, and from a really good family. I remember asking what that meant, and she laughed nervously. "You'll see," she said. Her tone carried an edge one I couldn't quite name at the time, but it would later make perfect sense. In the weeks that followed, I tried to get involved with the wedding planning. Not to control it, but to feel included. I offered to help pick out flowers, handle catering calls, even just review the guest list. Every time, she thanked me but politely declined. "It's all under control, Mom," she'd say. "I want this to be perfect." The word perfect became her mantra, one she used like a shield to control everything and everyone around her, especially me. Then one evening, over a brief dinner together, Clara dropped a small bomb that shattered my excitement. "Mom," she said, her voice even but firm. "I was thinking, maybe it would be best if you just attended the wedding as a guest. I don't want you to stress yourself or get overwhelmed with all the attention." I looked up from my coffee, trying to process her words. "As a guest?" I repeated. "I'm your mother." She smiled tightly. "Of course you are. I just mean, I'll have Aaron's mom handle most of the family coordination stuff. You can just enjoy the day. Just enjoy the day." The phrase felt like a knife wrapped in silk. She was pushing me out of the spotlight, out of the picture entirely. I wanted to ask her what I'd done wrong, or why she was so determined to distance herself from me, but I bit my tongue. I didn't want to ruin what was supposed to be a happy moment in her life. That night, I sat on my porch with a cup of tea, thinking about how motherhood changes. When Clara was little, she used to run into my arms after school, excitedly telling me everything about her day. Now I was just a guest, a background figure in her story. I tried to convince myself it didn't matter. I told myself that weddings can make people act strangely, that she was just stressed. But deep down, a quiet fear whispered that this was more than nerves. Deliberate. As the days went by, her distance grew more obvious. She'd call less, text rarely, and when she did, it was usually about logistics, nothing personal. Once, she mentioned Aaron's parents and how refined they were, how elegant their family was. The way she said it made me wonder if she was afraid I wouldn't measure up. I'd never been rich or glamorous. I worked in social services, helping struggling families get back on their feet. It wasn't a job that impressed high society types, but it gave me purpose. Still, I could tell Clara was ashamed of it. She had even once told a friend I worked in administration instead. That small lie had stung, but I said nothing. The truth is, I could handle being underestimated by strangers. But by my own daughter? That pain hits differently. It settles in your bones. The closer the wedding day approached, the more I sensed she was planning something I wasn't supposed to know about. A strange tension hung in the air every time she mentioned the ceremony. Sometimes she'd avoid eye contact, or change the subject when I asked about seating arrangements or the program. It was as if she was preparing for a performance and I wasn't meant to be part of the act. Still, I chose grace. I picked out a soft navy gown, understated but elegant. I made my peace with being just a guest. I told myself I'd smile, clap, and hold my head high no matter what. I'd survived heartbreak before. I could survive this too. I wasn't going to let my daughter's coldness ruin her big day or my dignity. But deep down, something told me she was planning something cruel, something I wasn't ready for. When I received my wedding invitation, I noticed my name was printed wrong intentionally. At first, I thought it was a simple printing mistake. The envelope was elegant, cream-colored with gold lettering, tied with a satin ribbon. It looked like something out of a bridal magazine. But as I opened it, my breath caught. Eve Cartwright. It read in swirling cursive. Not Evelyn Carter. Not even close. I stared at it for a long time. I checked the envelope again, same thing. Eve. She'd changed my name. It wasn't a typo, it was deliberate. I could tell from the perfection of everything else, every letter carefully pressed, every detail flawless. There was no way this was an accident. I called Clara immediately. She picked up after a few rings, her voice chipper. "Hey, Mom," she said, as if nothing was wrong. "Clara," I began carefully. "I think there's a mistake on my invitation." "Oh, what do you mean?" she asked. "It says Eve Cartwright. My name's not Cartwright." There was a pause. A small one, followed by a nervous laugh. "Oh, that. Yeah, I figured Evelyn Carter was a little formal." Eve sounded lighter. "And Cartwright, well, it just looked better in the design. You know, symmetry." I sat there in silence, gripping the phone tighter. "You changed my name for your wedding invitation, without asking me?" "Oh, Mom, don't make it a big deal," she said lightly. "It's just aesthetics. No one's going to notice." I wanted to shout, to tell her that names matter, that my name carried my identity, my history, my sacrifices. But before I could speak, I heard laughter in the background. Female voices. Her bridesmaids. Maybe. One of them said, "Did you tell her yet?" And another burst out giggling. Clara must have moved the phone away because her voice came back softer, almost strained. "Mom, I'll call you later, okay? We're in the middle of something." And just like that, the line went dead. I sat there for a long while, staring at the invitation again. The gold letters blurred through my tears. It wasn't the name change itself, it was the message behind it. She didn't want Evelyn Carter, the mother who worked tirelessly, who built a life from nothing, who once carried her through sleepless nights. She wanted a sanitized version, an Eve Cartwright, someone unremarkable, someone she could reshape into the image that fit her new world. Friends I confided in told me to let it go. "Don't ruin her day over something small," they said. Maybe she didn't mean it that way. But deep down, I knew Clara too well. She meant it exactly that way. My daughter was ashamed of me, or at least of how I represented her past. Still, I decided I would go. I refused to let her erase me so easily. I would show up, not to cause a scene, but because I deserved to see my own daughter get married. She could call me Eve, erase my title as Mother of the Bride, or seat me in the back row, but she couldn't erase the truth. I spent the next few days preparing quietly. I chose jewelry that had sentimental value, the silver necklace my late mother gave me when I graduated college. I had my hair done professionally for the first time in years. If she wanted me invisible, she'd be disappointed. I wasn't going to show up looking defeated. A week before the wedding, Clara texted me, "Just a reminder, please arrive 15 minutes before the ceremony. The ushers will help you find your seat." No warmth. No, can't wait to see you. Just logistics. I typed and deleted several replies before settling on a simple, "Got it." The night before the wedding, I barely slept. I lay awake thinking about the years I'd spent trying to be both mother and father. The school plays I attended alone. The birthdays I planned single-handedly. The nights I cried quietly in the kitchen so Clara wouldn't hear. And now, after everything, she wanted to pretend I was someone else. When the morning came, I dressed carefully. My hands trembled slightly as I fastened my necklace. I looked at myself in the mirror and saw a woman who'd survived, not perfectly, but honestly. Maybe. Clara couldn't see that yet, but someday, I hoped she would. As I arrived at the venue, a grand estate on the outskirts of town, I immediately felt out of place. Guests were mingling in designer outfits, sipping champagne. Every detail screamed wealth and status. I could almost hear Clara's voice telling people, "Oh, my mom? She's simple, sweet, doesn't really understand these things." Still, I held my head high. I checked in with the ushers, who guided me not to the family section, but to a seat near the back. Of course. I smiled politely, though my heart ached. From where I sat, I could barely see the altar. It didn't matter. I wasn't there for the view. I was there to keep my promise to be present, even when it hurt. And as I sat there, silently observing the lavish decorations and the laughter echoing through the hall, something unexpected happened. I caught sight of a tall man in a gray suit watching me intently. His face was calm but curious. Later, I would learn his name was Robert Aaron's father. At that moment, though, I just saw a stranger studying me, his gaze full of quiet understanding. And when I saw who took notice of my quiet pain, everything changed. The first time I met Aaron's family, I felt the temperature in the room drop. It was a dinner Clara had organized 2 months before the wedding, a small family get-together, she called it. I remember arriving at their home, a sprawling property with a cobblestone driveway and a chandelier glowing through the window like a symbol of how different their world was from mine. I'd brought a bottle of wine as a gesture of goodwill, even though I wasn't sure if that was appropriate for people of their social standing. When Aaron opened the door, he was warm and polite as always. "Mrs. Carter, it's great to see you," he said, offering a genuine smile. I could tell he was trying to make me feel comfortable. But the moment I stepped inside, I felt the subtle chill of polite judgment, the kind that doesn't need words. Aaron's mother, Diana, approached first. She was beautiful in that effortless, old-money way. Diamonds that didn't scream for attention. A silk blouse perfectly pressed. Her smile gracious but distant. "Evelyn, dear," she said, extending her hand. "So lovely to finally meet you. Clara's told us so much." Her hesitation on those last 2 words told me everything. Then came Robert Aaron's father. Tall, with silver hair and sharp blue eyes, he had a presence that commanded respect without trying. When he shook my hand, I noticed something different in his expression. He didn't look down on me the way Diana seemed to. He studied me, curious, like he was trying to place me from somewhere else. We all sat down for dinner. The table was set meticulously fine china, crystal glasses, candles flickering in perfect symmetry. Clara sat beside Aaron, glowing with pride. She was radiant, I won't deny it, but her energy was tense, as though she was holding her breath the entire evening. "So, Evelyn," Diana began, her tone casual but edged with polite curiosity. "Clara mentioned you work in social services?" "Yes," I said, smiling. "I help families access community resources, housing, childcare, things like that." "How noble," she replied, the faintest trace of condescension in her voice. "That must be fulfilling." I simply nodded. I'd learned long ago that people like her didn't understand the kind of work I did not really. But then, Robert spoke. "Social services," he said slowly, leaning forward. "That's remarkable. I used to fund community initiatives when I worked with the State Development Board. I think we may have crossed paths before." Clara shifted uncomfortably in her seat. "Dad, you probably just read about similar programs," she interjected quickly, her tone tight. "Mom's been in that field for ages. It's not that big a circle." Robert's gaze lingered on me. "No," he said quietly. "I'm sure I've seen you before. Evelyn Carter. You were the director of the Hopewell Family Initiative about 10 years ago. Weren't you?" The table went silent. Clara's fork froze midair. My heart skipped a beat. I hadn't heard that name in years, not since I left the program after funding cuts. I nodded slowly. Yes. I said. We worked on outreach programs for low-income families in 3 counties. Robert smiled, genuine and warm. I knew it. You did incredible work. My cousin's family benefited from one of your initiatives after his layoff. They still talk about it. You helped them get back on their feet. Diana blinked, in mild surprise. Oh, really? I didn't realize. Clara cut her off abruptly. That was ages ago, she said quickly, her voice forced. Mom's not involved in that kind of thing anymore. She turned to me with a pointed look, as if begging me to drop the subject. I smiled faintly, deciding to respect her discomfort for now. That's true, I said softly. I stepped away when funding changed, but it was meaningful work. Robert nodded. Well, it certainly left an impression, he said, lifting his glass toward me. It's not often you meet someone who's quietly made a difference in people's lives. That moment should have felt good, it should have filled me with pride. But instead, it filled the room with tension. Clara's face was a mix of embarrassment and irritation, her forced smile barely holding. I didn't understand why she looked so unsettled by a compliment. As the night went on, the conversation drifted toward wedding details. Diana asked about the floral arrangements and the guest list. Aaron talked about the honeymoon, and Clara meticulously controlled every topic, steering the spotlight away from me whenever it tried to return. At one point, Robert looked at me again and said softly, You remind me of someone I used to work with in D.C. Same determination. Same warmth. His comment was innocent enough, but Clara's hand tightened around her wine glass. Later, as dessert was served, I excused myself to the restroom. When I came back, I caught a fragment of Clara's voice low, irritated. Dad, please don't go into her past like that, it's complicated. Robert's reply was calm but firm. It's not complicated, Clara. It's admirable. She didn't realize I'd heard. And I didn't let her know. I simply sat back down and finished my tea, pretending everything was fine. But my heart was heavy. My daughter was ashamed of the woman I'd once been, and even more ashamed that her fiancé's father saw value in me. When dinner finally ended, Robert walked me to my car. It was a pleasure, Evelyn, he said kindly. You should be proud of what you've done. Not many people leave behind a legacy like that. Thank you, I said, trying to hold back tears. That means a lot. As I drove home that night, my hands trembled on the steering wheel. I replayed the evening over and over, realizing how much effort Clara had put into controlling my image. She didn't want her in-laws to see me as accomplished, she wanted them to see me as ordinary, someone unthreatening, someone small. I didn't know it then, but Robert already recognized something about me that Clara desperately wanted to hide. Something in my gut told me that Clara was hiding more than just embarrassment. It wasn't just about appearances anymore. The way she flinched every time someone mentioned my name or brought up my past, it was like she was terrified the truth would come out. But what truth? I hadn't done anything to be ashamed of. My only crime, it seemed, was being the kind of mother who refused to give up when life got hard. I began noticing the small things first. Whenever wedding details came up, she avoided any mention of family traditions. If someone asked about her upbringing, she'd change the subject. When Robert brought up community programs again, she rolled her eyes and forced a laugh, saying things like, Mom's always been into those charity things. Charity things, as if my entire career was a hobby, not decades of work to help people in need. After that dinner, my instincts sharpened. A mother knows when something's off, that quiet, invisible thread that tugs inside your chest whenever your child is lying or hiding something. It wasn't about deceit in the usual sense. It was about shame. Clara was ashamed of me. When she was a teenager, I remember how she used to complain that I spent too much time with the families I worked with. She didn't understand why I stayed late, why I missed a school recital or two to help someone find housing. I always made it up to her late-night ice cream runs, heartfelt talks, promises that she'd always be my priority. But as she got older, she saw my compassion as weakness. She didn't want to be known as the girl with the social worker mom. She wanted to belong somewhere glamorous, somewhere my world didn't fit. Still, I never realized how deeply that resentment had taken root. One afternoon, about 3 weeks before the wedding, I went over to her place to drop off some old family photos. I thought she might want to include them in a display, something sentimental, something that showed where she came from. She barely glanced at them. "Oh, Mom," she said with a forced smile. "These are sweet. But I'm not really doing that kind of thing. We're going for more of a minimalist look." "Minimalist?" I asked, laughing softly. "You mean no family photos?" She shrugged. "It's not that kind of wedding. Aaron's parents are expecting something elegant, not nostalgic." I understood what she meant. She didn't want me or my life represented in her version of elegance. It stung, but I nodded. "Whatever makes you happy, sweetheart," I said. And I meant it, even if my heart ached. That night, I found myself thinking back to my years in social work. Before I worked in local outreach, I had led a statewide program that partnered with government agencies, one that brought real change to struggling families. We got grants, we changed policies, we created opportunities. I was proud of that work. I had letters of thanks from families who'd once been homeless, children who'd grown up to become teachers and doctors. I had made a difference. But to Clara, that part of me was a threat, a reminder that her mother had once been someone important in a world she didn't control. She wanted to define me on her terms, quiet, simple, forgettable. It was strange, because I had spent my entire life trying to protect her from feeling small. I'd wanted her to feel strong, confident, worthy. I'd sacrificed so much for that. But maybe, in doing so, I'd created a shadow she didn't know how to live under. The next time I saw her, she seemed tense. We were at a boutique, picking out her wedding accessories. She was beautiful, glowing. But every time the saleswoman called me the mother of the bride, Clara would subtly correct her, "Just Evelyn, please." By the third time, I stopped reacting. I just smiled and played along. As we left the store, she seemed relieved. That's when I knew this wasn't about me doing something wrong. It was about her trying to erase part of her own reflection. Because when she looked at me, she saw the parts of herself she didn't like. The vulnerability, the imperfection, the reminder that life wasn't always polished or easy. Later that night, I confided in my friend Lorraine. She'd been my neighbor for years, practically family. She listened quietly as I vented. "She's just nervous," Lorraine said gently. "Weddings bring out strange sides of people. Don't take it to heart." But I couldn't shake the feeling. "It's not nerves, Lorraine, it's something else. It's like she's trying to make me disappear." Lorraine sighed. "Then maybe it's time she learns what happens when she underestimates her mother." I smiled sadly. "I'm not looking for revenge," I said. "I just want her to remember who I am." And maybe that was the problem I had let her forget. I had hidden my strength, my story, to keep her comfortable. I'd dimmed my own light so she could shine brighter. But sitting there, sipping tea in Lorraine's kitchen, I realized something important. I wasn't doing either of us any favors by staying small. I decided that when the wedding day came, I wouldn't hide anymore. I wouldn't show off, but I wouldn't apologize for existing either. I would walk in as myself, the woman who raised her, the woman who survived, the woman who built something out of nothing. I didn't realize she was about to make sure that healing would never happen. On the morning of the wedding, I found out Clara had changed the dress code and hadn't told me. I was standing in front of my mirror, smoothing the fabric of my navy blue gown, when my phone buzzed with a message from Lorraine. She was already at the venue. "Evelyn, sweetheart," the text read. "I think there's been a mix-up. Everyone's wearing pastel colors. You might want to check." My heart dropped. I looked down at my reflection, elegant but distinctly different from the light, airy palette Lorraine described. Panic fluttered in my chest. I scrolled through my messages from Clara, hoping to find something about a theme or color scheme. There was nothing. I had followed the only instructions she gave. "Just wear something nice, Mom." So I did. I'd spent weeks finding that gown simple but graceful, with soft lace at the sleeves and a flattering silhouette. It made me feel dignified. Now, apparently, it made me look out of place. Still, I refused to let that stop me. I'd promised myself I wouldn't cry, wouldn't crumble, wouldn't let anyone see my hurt. I took one last look at myself and whispered, "You belong there just as much as anyone." Then I grabbed my purse and headed out. The venue was breathtaking, a sprawling estate covered in white roses and gold accents, every detail meticulously arranged. Guests were already gathering when I arrived. And just as Lorraine had said, every woman there wore shades of blush, cream, or baby blue. I stood among them like a dark note in a symphony of pastels. Heads turned as I walked by, whispers followed. "Oh, I guess she didn't get the memo. Is that the mother of the bride? Maybe she thought it was formal?" Their voices buzzed around me like gnats, polite enough not to sting directly but impossible to ignore. I smiled through it all, forcing my posture tall. I found Lorraine near the refreshment table. She gave me a look full of sympathy. "You look beautiful, Evelyn," she whispered. "Don't let anyone make you feel otherwise." Before I could respond, the music changed. Clara was walking down the aisle. I turned, and for a moment, everything else fell away. She looked stunning, radiant, poised, every bit the princess she'd always dreamed of being. My heart ached with love and pride, despite everything. She caught my eye briefly and smiled, though it didn't reach her eyes. It was the kind of smile you give to someone you wish wasn't there. After the ceremony, guests moved to the reception hall. That's when the whispers returned, louder this time. As I entered the ballroom, I saw the seating chart displayed beautifully on a gold easel. My name, or rather, Eve Cartwright, was printed near the bottom, table 14, in the far corner. I wasn't near the family table, not even close. The Carter name had vanished entirely from the wedding. For a split second, I considered walking out. I could have left quietly, saved myself the humiliation, but something inside me, call it pride, call it self-respect, refused. I took a deep breath, straightened my shoulders, and walked to my assigned table. The table mates were kind enough, acquaintances from my neighborhood who'd received pity invitations. They tried to make conversation, but I could tell they felt awkward too. They knew where I should have been seated. Everyone did. Midway through dinner, I saw Robert watching me from the head table. His gaze wasn't pitying, it was observant. I could tell he'd noticed everything. The seating, the wrong name, the dress. His expression was thoughtful, almost protective. Diana sat beside him, elegantly composed as ever, chatting politely with guests, but Robert's attention never drifted far. Later, as people mingled, I made my way to the dessert table. Clara approached me then, her face painted with a perfect public smile. "Mom! You made it," she said cheerfully, her voice carrying just enough volume for others to hear. "I did," I said softly. "You look beautiful." "Thank you," she replied. Her eyes flicked to my dress. "Oh, I guess no one told you about the color theme." "It's fine though, you stand out." The words were sweetly spoken but sharp underneath. "I suppose I do," I said, holding her gaze. She leaned in slightly, still smiling. "Mom, just try not to draw too much attention, okay? This is my day." I felt something inside me crack, not loudly, not visibly, but quietly, like glass splitting under pressure. "Of course," I murmured. "I wouldn't dream of it." As she turned to greet another guest, I caught Robert watching again. A faint frown crossed his face. When Clara left, he approached me. "Evelyn," he said in a low voice, "may I say something?" "Of course." He hesitated, choosing his words carefully. "You handle yourself with remarkable grace, but you shouldn't have to." His sincerity caught me off guard. "It's fine," I said automatically. "It's her day." He nodded slowly, though his eyes said he didn't believe me. Still, no one should make their mother feel like an outsider at her own child's wedding. That simple statement nearly undid me. I blinked away tears, forcing a smile. "Thank you, Robert. That means more than you know." He gave me a small, knowing nod. "Clara's lucky to have you, whether she realizes it yet or not." As the night went on, the laughter and music blurred around me. I clapped during the toasts, smiled for the photos, did everything a good mother should. But deep inside, I was breaking. When the speeches began, I felt a strange heaviness settle in my chest, the sense that something more was coming. Clara stood at the microphone, glass in hand, glowing under the lights. She looked out at the crowd, her smile dazzling. But when her eyes met mine, there was something in them I couldn't quite read. Something sharp, rehearsed, and dangerous. I had no idea Robert was about to dig into the very truth Clara had tried to bury. When Clara took the microphone, I braced myself, but I wasn't ready for the cruelty that followed. The room hushed as she stood beneath the chandelier, the light catching on her white gown like a halo. She looked perfect, composed, radiant, every bit the elegant bride she'd dreamed of becoming, the kind of woman who had everything under control. But when she spoke, her voice carried an undertone I'd never heard before, sweet, practiced, and calculated. "First," she began, smiling, "I want to thank everyone for being here today, my friends, my new family, and, of course, my mom." There was polite applause, and I smiled, even though my hands trembled slightly. "My mom raised me alone," she continued. "She's always been, well, people." She laughed softly, drawing a few chuckles from the guests. "Sometimes too passionate, honestly. I think I learned early on that not every problem in life can be solved by giving someone a pep talk and a casserole." The crowd laughed again. My stomach twisted. I forced a smile, hoping she'd stop there. But she didn't. "She always wanted to be the center of attention," Clara said, her tone still light, her smile never faltering. "Even when I was little, she'd show up at school events and somehow end up on stage with the teachers." More laughter rippled through the hall. "But I guess that's where I get my confidence, from watching her turn every moment into a performance." The words landed like blows, disguised as jokes. People around me chuckled politely, not realizing or maybe pretending not to realize the pain in them. I could feel the heat creeping up my neck, my heart pounding against my ribs. I tried to focus on breathing, on keeping my face neutral. This was my daughter, my little girl. Surely, she didn't mean to humiliate me. Surely, she was just nervous, trying to fill the silence with humor. But then she said it, the line that broke me. "I want to thank my mom for teaching me what not to do in life, how not to make everything about yourself." The laughter that followed wasn't polite this time. It was real. A wave of it, echoing off the walls, sharp and cruel. I sat frozen, my fingers clenched around my napkin so tightly I thought it might tear. The sound blurred around me, my throat felt dry. I could feel eyes turning toward me, pitying, curious, entertained. I caught sight of Robert at the head table. His expression had gone cold, his eyes narrowing slightly. He wasn't laughing. He wasn't smiling. He looked furious. Clara kept going, oblivious to the tension. "But seriously," she said, waving her hand dismissively, "I love my mom. She's always been there for me, even when I didn't want her to be." Another forced laugh. "So here's to the woman who made me who I am today, even if she made it complicated." This time, the laughter was thinner, uncertain. People could feel the discomfort now. Even Diana shifted uncomfortably in her seat. I lowered my gaze, blinking back tears that threatened to spill. My cheeks burned. My heart hurt in a way I can't fully describe, not like physical pain, but something deeper, like a wound reopening after years of healing. Then, in the middle of that awkward silence, Robert stood up. His chair scraped loudly against the floor, the sound cutting through the room like a blade. Clara froze, startled. "Robert?" she said, her smile faltering. He stepped forward, his face unreadable. "I think," he began calmly, his voice firm but steady, "everyone here deserves to know who this woman really is." A murmur rippled through the guests. Clara's eyes widened in panic. "Dad, please." Robert ignored her. He turned toward the crowd. "You see, what most of you probably don't know," he said, gesturing toward me, "is that Evelyn Carter isn't just the bride's mother. She's someone who's made a real difference in this world." The entire hall fell silent. He continued, his voice rising slightly. Years ago, Evelyn ran a statewide family outreach initiative, one that helped countless families get back on their feet. I know because one of those families was mine. My cousin lost everything: job, home, hope, and your mother, Clara, was the one who gave them a second chance. She's not just a guest here. She's the kind of woman communities are built around. Gasps echoed around the room. People turned to look at me with new eyes. My throat tightened as tears finally broke free, sliding down my cheeks. Clara stood frozen, her face pale. "Dad, please," she whispered. But Robert wasn't finished. "You may think your mother embarrasses you," he said sharply, looking directly at her. "But what's truly embarrassing is pretending you're better than the person who gave you everything." The silence that followed was deafening. You could feel the weight of it pressing on everyone. Even the waitstaff paused, unsure whether to move. Clara stood there, speechless, her hands trembling around the microphone. Aaron looked stunned beside her, glancing between her and his father. I sat there, my tears falling freely now, not from shame but from disbelief. For years, I'd stayed quiet, hidden my pride, dimmed my light so my daughter could shine. And here was a man, a stranger, really standing up for me in front of everyone, shining a light on what I'd buried. Robert slowly turned toward me. His expression softened. "Evelyn," he said gently, "you have more dignity than most people in this room. Don't ever forget that." I couldn't speak. I could only nod, my lips trembling as I whispered, "Thank you." Around us, the atmosphere had changed completely. The guests who had laughed earlier now avoided my eyes. A few looked ashamed. Others looked curious, whispering among themselves. Clara lowered the microphone, her face tight with humiliation and anger. Without another word, she turned and walked out of the room. Aaron followed her hesitantly, his face a storm of confusion. Robert sat back down slowly, his eyes still hard, his jaw set. And I sat there in the back corner, surrounded by silence and shame, but for the first time that day, not my own. And in that moment, the tables began to turn. Robert began speaking not with anger, but with awe. There was something powerful about his voice, the kind that didn't need to be loud to command attention. The room had gone still, every guest frozen mid-breath, unsure whether to look at Clara or at me. The music had stopped. The clinking of glasses ceased. All that remained was Robert's voice echoing through the hall. He looked at me, then back at guests. "I want to tell you a story," he said calmly. "Years ago, when my cousin lost his job and his family was on the brink of losing everything, he found hope through a community program called the Hopewell Family Initiative. It wasn't just a charity, it was a lifeline. And the person leading that program, the one who helped rebuild his life, was Evelyn Carter." Whispers rippled across the room. People turned toward me with surprise, some with shame. I felt my pulse quicken, my heart hammering in my chest. I wanted to disappear, but at the same time, I wanted to finally breathe. It had been years since anyone had spoken my name with pride. Robert continued, his tone warm but firm. "She didn't just sign papers or hand out checks, she was there. Late nights, personal calls, visiting families, making sure no one fell through the cracks. She changed lives. You see, real compassion doesn't come from money or status, it comes from strength, from sacrifice. Evelyn has both." The silence that followed was thick, reverent even. I could see people processing his words, connecting the quiet woman in the corner with the picture he painted. Diana sat at the head table, her expression unreadable, but her eyes softened slightly as she looked my way. Clara stood frozen beside the microphone. Her face had gone pale, her lips parted slightly as if she wanted to interrupt but couldn't find the words. She looked like a child again, caught in something much bigger than she could control. Robert turned to her gently. "Clara, I don't know what story you've told yourself about your mother," he said, "but you should be proud. The woman sitting there has done more for others than most people ever will." A murmur of agreement spread through the crowd. Someone clapped softly, and soon, others followed. The applause wasn't thunderous, it was slow, deliberate, respectful. Every clap hit me like a wave, not because I craved validation, but because I'd never expected to receive it, especially not here, Not now. Not like this. Tears filled my eyes. I hadn't asked for recognition. I'd spent years being invisible on purpose, staying small so Clara could have her own space to grow. But in that moment, I realized that maybe I'd let her forget who I was completely. When the applause died down, Robert walked back to his seat, his jaw tight, his eyes steady. He had done something extraordinary, not just for me, but for truth itself. Clara, meanwhile, stood still for a long moment, gripping the microphone like it was the only thing keeping her upright. Finally, she spoke, her voice shaky. I was just joking. Robert looked up at her sharply. It didn't sound like a joke. Erin reached for her hand, but she pulled away. Her face was red now, her expression somewhere between fury and humiliation. She looked at me across the room, her eyes full of something I couldn't quite read: anger, yes, but also fear. For a brief second, I thought she might apologize. Instead, she turned and walked off the stage, muttering something I couldn't hear. Erin stood there awkwardly, then gave a small, apologetic smile before following her. The moment they disappeared, people began whispering again, this time about Clara. Why would she talk like that to her mother? Someone whispered behind me. She must have been jealous. Did you see Robert's face? Poor Evelyn, imagine being treated that way. I sat perfectly still, not wanting to feed the fire. My hands were trembling in my lap, but for the first time that evening, it wasn't from humiliation, it was from the weight of being seen. Robert leaned toward me a few minutes later. I'm sorry if I embarrassed you, he said quietly. I couldn't sit there and listen to that. I shook my head. You didn't embarrass me. You reminded me that I'm allowed to exist. He smiled, faintly. Good. Because you deserve to be recognized for the woman you are, not erased for the image someone else wants to project. Diana nodded politely, though she still seemed uncertain about what to say. But I could tell even she saw me differently now. The tone of her gaze had changed from distant curiosity to genuine respect. As the evening slowly regained rhythm, the band resumed playing, though the air never quite recovered from the tension. Some guests approached me quietly, offering kind words or awkward apologies. We had no idea, one woman said softly. You've raised a remarkable daughter. She must get her strength from you. I smiled politely but said nothing. I didn't feel triumphant. I didn't feel vindicated. I just felt tired, like a truth long buried had finally come up for air. Still, I couldn't help but notice the shift in the room. Where there had once been laughter at my expense, there was now silence, reflection, even guilt. People saw me differently now, but I also saw my daughter differently. For years, I'd thought her coldness came from distance, from growing up, from trying to find herself. But now, I saw it clearly. It wasn't distance, it was fear. She feared my story, my strength, my past, everything that reminded her of where she came from. As the music played and guests tried to pretend the evening hadn't fractured, I sat there quietly, feeling something I hadn't felt in a long time: dignity. But I didn't yet realize just how far Clara would go to twist the story again. After Robert's revelation, whispers spread like wildfire through the reception. It was as if someone had dropped a stone into still water, and the ripples were reaching every corner of the room. Guests who had laughed during Clara's speech were now avoiding my eyes. Others, mostly older women, came up to me with quiet words of sympathy, touching my arm, offering kind smiles. It should have made me feel vindicated, but all I felt was numb. Robert's words had changed everything, not just how others saw me, but how I saw Clara. She wasn't just a nervous bride who'd gone too far with her jokes. She was someone who'd planned my humiliation. The realization settled in slowly, cold and heavy. A few minutes after her abrupt exit, Aaron followed her out, clearly torn. He glanced back at me before leaving, his expression full of apology. I managed a faint nod, silently telling him it wasn't his fault. Around me, the band played awkwardly on, trying to fill the silence with cheerful noise. But the atmosphere had shifted, joy had turned into tension, and celebration into discomfort. Robert approached me again, this time looking regretful. I didn't mean to create a scene, he said quietly. lowering his voice so only I could hear. But I couldn't sit there and watch her disrespect you like that. I shook my head. You did what I couldn't, I replied softly. You told the truth. He studied me for a moment, his eyes kind but searching. You remind me of someone I used to work with, strong, steady, but always carrying everyone else's burdens. Sometimes, people like that forget they deserve kindness too. I smiled faintly. I stopped expecting kindness a long time ago. It's easier that way. He frowned slightly, as if he didn't agree, but said nothing more. Later that evening, after most guests had resumed dancing and drinking to lighten the mood, Clara returned. Her face was blotchy from crying, but her jaw was set. The moment she saw me, her expression hardened. She didn't say a word as she approached. The chatter around us dimmed slightly, people sensing another confrontation. "Mom," she said under her breath, forcing a smile for the crowd. "Can we talk outside?" I followed her out into the garden, where strings of fairy lights glowed over the dark hedges. The air was cool, still thick with tension. The moment we were five reins in drive, alone, her mask dropped. "You made me look like a fool," she hissed. I blinked, stunned. "Me? Clara," I didn't say a word. "That was Robert." She crossed her arms. "You think I don't know how you manipulated him? You've always had a way of making people pity you. You just had to make this about yourself, didn't you?" The venom in her voice startled me. For a second, I was too shocked to respond. "Clara," I said quietly, "I didn't ask for any of this. I came here to celebrate you." She scoffed. "You came here to make me look small. And congratulations, you succeeded." I took a step closer, my voice trembling but firm. "No, Clara, you did that to yourself. You wanted to humiliate me in front of your husband's family, and it backfired. Don't twist that into my fault." Her eyes filled with angry tears. "You don't get it. You've always been the inspiring single mom, the saint, the hero. I just wanted one day that was mine." Her words hit like a punch. "You think I ever wanted the attention?" I asked, my voice breaking. "I spent my whole life working hard so you wouldn't have to struggle the way I did. Everything I did, every hour I worked, every night I stayed up worrying was for you." She turned away, pacing, her hands trembling. "You don't understand," she said again. Quieter now. "People like Robert and Diana, they respect you more than they respect me now. I saw it in their faces. You took my moment." I exhaled slowly, realizing there was no reasoning with her. She wasn't ready to face herself, not yet. The insecurity that had always lived beneath her confidence had finally surfaced, ugly and raw. "I didn't take anything from you," I said softly. "You gave it away." She spun toward me, eyes blazing. "You'll never understand how it feels to live in your shadow." That hurt not because it was true, but because it wasn't. I'd never thought of myself as someone who cast shadows. I had spent years dimming my own light just to make sure hers shone. But that's the thing about resentment, it doesn't always make sense. It just festers quietly until it consumes everything good around it. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't cry. I simply looked at her and said, "I hope one day you see that I've only ever wanted the best for you." Before she could respond, Aaron appeared in the doorway. Hesitant. "Clara," he said gently, "everyone's waiting for you." His tone carried a mix of concern and disappointment. She gave him a sharp look, then brushed past me without another word. Aaron lingered for a moment. "Mrs. Carter," he said softly. "I'm sorry. I didn't know she was going to—" He trailed off, searching for words. "She's under a lot of pressure. I'll talk to her." I nodded, forcing a tired smile. "Thank you, Aaron. You seem like a good man. I hope she learns to see that." He gave me a small nod before heading back inside. I stood in the garden for a long time after that, the distant sound of laughter drifting from the hall. It was strange that laughter had once been my favorite sound in the world when it came from Clara. But now, it just hurt. When I finally returned to my car later that night, the air felt heavy, like the aftermath of a storm. I sat behind the wheel, staring out at the twinkling lights of the estate, and realized something painful but true. I could forgive her for being angry, for being human. But I wasn't sure I could forgive her for being cruel. And for the first time, I realized my daughter's resentment wasn't just jealousy, it was something darker. That night, after most guests had left, Clara demanded to set the record straight. I had been standing near the exit, waiting for my chance to quietly leave, when she approached me with a determined stride and fire in her eyes. Her makeup was smudged, her hair falling loose from its careful updo, but her anger burned bright beneath the exhaustion. "Mom, we need to talk," she said sharply, glancing around to make sure no one was close enough to hear. Now. I wanted to tell her that nothing good ever came from arguments after midnight, but I saw there was no stopping her. So I followed her into one of the empty reception rooms, the soft glow of candles still flickering across the tables littered with half-empty glasses and forgotten favors. She turned to face me, arms crossed, chin high. "You've ruined everything." I stared at her, stunned. "Ruined everything?" "Clara, I didn't say a single word." "Robert. Don't," she snapped, her voice trembling. "Don't act innocent. You think I don't see what you did? You played him, Mom. You made him feel sorry for you." I felt the anger stir in my chest, slow but steady. "I didn't play anyone. I sat quietly while you mocked me in front of 200 people. Her eyes flashed. "It was supposed to be light-hearted. You always take everything so personally. It's not my fault he overreacted and made you look like some kind of hero." The word hero dripped with sarcasm. She didn't even realize how cruel she sounded. I took a slow breath, forcing calm into my voice. "Clara, that man didn't make me look like anything. He told the truth, something you've been running from for years." "Running from?" She laughed bitterly. "You really think your truth is something to be proud of? You worked yourself into exhaustion, barely scraped by, and you think that makes you a saint? I didn't want to grow up like that, Mom. I wanted better." I stepped closer, lowering my voice. "And you got better. You had a college education I never could afford. You had opportunities I fought tooth and nail to give you. But better doesn't mean forgetting where you came from." She looked away, her jaw clenched. "You always think you know everything." I sighed. "No, Clara. I just know you better than you know yourself." That made her snap. "Stop talking like you're the victim here. You're not perfect, Mom. You act like you sacrificed everything for me, but maybe I didn't ask for that. Maybe I just wanted a normal mother, not one who spent all her time saving everyone else." Her words hit me like a slap. I felt something inside me crumble. "Normal?" I repeated softly. "You mean quiet? Invisible? The kind of mother who never made anyone uncomfortable by caring too much?" She hesitated, but her pride wouldn't let her back down. "I just didn't want to live in your shadow," she said finally, her voice barely above a whisper. For a moment, I didn't say anything. I just looked at her, really looked at her, and saw a reflection of myself at that age. The stubbornness, the need to be seen, the fear of being small. She wasn't just angry at me, she was angry at the version of herself she thought she saw in me. "You know what's funny?" I said quietly. "I spent half my life trying to protect you from the world, and now you're trying to protect yourself from me." She frowned, confused. "What are you talking about?" "I never wanted you to feel small, Clara," I continued, my voice shaking. "I worked hard so you could have choices, but you've mistaken my strength for competition. You think love is a contest, that my success somehow stole from yours. It didn't. It gave you the chance to have one." Her mouth opened, then closed again. For a split second, I saw her walls crack, just a glimpse of guilt in her eyes before she rebuilt them with defiance. Aaron appeared in the doorway then, hesitant, clearly uncomfortable but unwilling to leave her alone. "Clara," he said softly, "maybe you should take a breath. This isn't the time." She rounded on him instantly. "Don't tell me what to do, Aaron. You don't understand." He sighed. "I understand more than you think." He looked at me, then back at her. "You know, I used to envy people with parents like yours, people who actually cared. You have no idea how lucky you are." She blinked, startled. "Lucky? Did you not see what she did? What you did?" Aaron interrupted, his tone firm. You mocked your own mother on your wedding day. You think that's strength? No, Clara, that's cruelty. Her mouth fell open in shock. You're taking her side? I'm taking the side of decency, he said simply. Your father didn't embarrass you, Clara. You embarrassed yourself. The silence that followed was thick and suffocating. Clara's face turned red, her eyes welling with angry tears. She looked between the two of us, then back at Aaron, her lip trembling. I can't believe this, she whispered. You're supposed to be my husband. I am, he said quietly. But I'm not going to stand by while you tear down the person who gave you everything. I wanted to speak to tell him to stop, to save their marriage from unraveling right there, but the truth was, he was saying everything I'd never had the courage to say. Clara's breathing quickened. She turned to me, her voice cracking. You've always done this. You make everyone love you and leave me looking like the bad guy. You've been doing it my whole life. I shook my head slowly. No, Clara, I've just been living my life. You're the one who decided that love had to be a competition. Her shoulders sagged, the anger fading into exhaustion. For the first time that night, she looked small, fragile, even. I just wanted one day where I wasn't compared to you, she whispered. I stepped forward, gently taking her hand. She didn't pull away. Then stop comparing yourself, I said softly. I'm your mother, Clara, not your rival. Tears finally spilled down her cheeks. Aaron reached for her, wrapping an arm around her shoulder. She didn't resist this time. For a long while, none of us spoke. The only sound was the faint hum of music from the main hall, muffled by the closed doors. I felt years of tension hanging between us, thick but fragile like glass that could shatter with one wrong word. Finally, Aaron broke the silence. Maybe this is where we start over, he said quietly. I nodded slowly, though I wasn't sure any of us were ready for that yet. But something had shifted. The truth was out. Masks had fallen. And as I watched my daughter break down in her husband's arms, I realized something powerful. I didn't need to prove my worth anymore. I had already lived it. And with that, Clara's perfect image began to crumble. The wedding ended in whispers and chaos. What should have been a perfect evening the night my daughter became a wife turned into something that would be talked about behind closed doors for years. By the time I got home, my phone was buzzing with messages. Some were from friends who'd been there, offering sympathy. Others were from relatives who hadn't attended but already heard things. I ignored them all. I didn't want to relive it. I didn't want pity. I just wanted quiet. I sat in my kitchen with a cup of tea, staring at the flickering light of the old ceiling bulb, and tried to make sense of everything. How had things between Clara and me turned so bitter, so quickly? I'd known there was distance between us, but I never realized just how deep her resentment went or how much she had let it define her. Over the next few days, there was nothing but silence. No calls, no texts, not even a message to say she'd made it to her honeymoon destination. I tried to convince myself that maybe she needed space, that the embarrassment had been too much for her to face right away. But the truth was harder. I think she was angry that I hadn't stayed small. A week later, I got a call from Robert and Diana. Their voices were calm, kind, almost hesitant. Evelyn, Robert began, we wanted to apologize again for what happened. That wasn't fair to you. There's no need to apologize, I said gently. You only told the truth. Diana spoke next, her tone softer than it had ever been. You showed remarkable composure that night. I don't know if I could have done the same in your position. I've had a lot of practice, I said with a small laugh. When you raise a child alone, you learn to stay composed even when the world feels like it's falling apart. They invited me to meet them for coffee the next morning. I almost declined. Part of me wanted to move on, to bury that night in the past, but something in Robert's voice told me it wasn't just about polite gestures. When we met, they treated me with warmth that caught me off guard. They asked about my work, my community projects, even about Clara as a little girl. She was always so full of energy, Diana said with a wistful smile. I can see where she gets it now. For the first time, I felt like they truly saw me not as the embarrassed, overlooked mother, but as a woman with her own story, her own strength. Before we parted ways, Robert said quietly, I hope you don't let that night define your relationship with her. She's young. Pride can make people foolish. I nodded, though part of me wasn't sure if youth was the problem. Pride doesn't care about age, it only cares about control. Another week passed before Aaron reached out. He came by one afternoon, alone, carrying a bouquet of daisies, Clara's favorite flower. I invited him in, though I could tell he was nervous. "I don't know how to start," he said, setting the flowers down on the table. "Clara's struggling. She's been distant. I think she feels like everyone's judging her after what happened." I sighed softly. That's not surprising. But she's the one who created that storm. She needs to face it. He nodded. "She will. But I wanted you to know, she does feel bad. She's just too proud to admit it." I smiled sadly. "She's her mother's daughter then." That made him chuckle, the tension easing slightly. "She loves you, Mrs. Carter. I can see it even when she's angry. She just doesn't know how to deal with that love without feeling small in comparison." His words caught me off guard. "Small?" I repeated. He nodded. "You've lived a big life. You've done things most people wouldn't even attempt. Clara's always felt she needed to live up to that, and she's scared she never will." For a moment, I didn't know what to say. I'd never thought of it that way. I had always assumed she wanted to distance herself because she was ashamed. But maybe, deep down, she was afraid that no matter what she did, she'd never measure up. "She doesn't have to," I said quietly. "I never wanted her to be me. I just wanted her to be happy." Aaron smiled faintly. "Then tell her that someday, I think she needs to hear it." When he left, I sat in the same quiet kitchen where I'd once dreamed of seeing my daughter walk down the aisle with pride in her eyes. Now, all I felt was a strange mixture of relief and sorrow. Relief that I had finally been seen, sorrow that it had cost me so much. The days turned into weeks. I went back to work, helping families navigate hardship, listening to their stories. It grounded me again, reminded me that the world was bigger than one broken relationship. The people I helped had wounds of their own, but they also had resilience. Their strength gave me strength. One evening, I got a text from an unknown number. It was short. "I'm sorry. I'll call when I'm ready. See." My heart ached reading it. It wasn't much, but it was something. I didn't respond right away. I wanted to. But I knew she needed to take the first real step. I'd carried us both for long enough. Robert called again a few days later, inviting me to a charity dinner his foundation was hosting. I agreed, though I hesitated at first. It wasn't about appearances, it was about reclaiming a part of myself I'd let fade for years. That night, as I stood at that event, surrounded by people who actually wanted to hear about my work, I realized something important. I'd thought being a good mother meant being small enough to fit into her version of love. But standing there, seen, respected, valued, I understood I didn't need her validation anymore. But life has a way of bringing truth back, louder the second time. 3 months later, I received a call from Aaron. His voice was shaking. I was sitting in my small office at the community center, reviewing grant proposals, when my phone buzzed. Seeing his name on the screen startled me. We hadn't spoken since the charity dinner Robert invited me to. I hesitated before answering, unsure what kind of news waited on the other end. "Hello?" I said cautiously. "Mrs. Carter, hi. It's Aaron," he said, his voice low and uncertain. "I hope I'm not interrupting anything." "Not at all," I replied, setting my pen down. "Is everything okay?" There was a pause. "Clara's been seeing someone, a therapist, I mean." His voice cracked slightly. "It's been rough. She's coming to terms with things." I sat back slowly, my chest tightening. "What kind of things?" He exhaled heavily, as if releasing something he'd been holding in for weeks. Her guilt, her anger, everything that happened that night. She told her therapist that she didn't want to face you because she's ashamed. She said she's been replaying that speech in her head over and over again, and she can't forgive herself for it. For a moment, I didn't speak. I just listened to the faint hum of static between us. "She's not a bad person," I said softly, She just got lost. I know, he said quickly. She's realizing that now. She told me she never hated you, she hated how she felt around you. She said you made her feel small, but not because of anything you did. It's because she's never felt like she could live up to you. That word again, small. I'd heard it before from Clara's lips, from my own thoughts, echoing in the quiet moments of motherhood when I wondered if I'd been too much, too strong, too visible. I had never meant to cast a shadow over her. I had only wanted to light her way. Does she want to talk to me? I finally asked. He hesitated. She does, but she's scared. She said she doesn't deserve your forgiveness yet. I swallowed hard. Tell her she doesn't need to deserve it. She's my daughter. That's enough. Aaron promised to pass along my words, and after we hung up, I sat in silence for a long while, staring at the framed photo on my desk, Clara, age 6, sitting on my lap with chocolates smeared across her cheeks, her arms around my neck. Her smile in that photo was pure, unguarded. She had trusted me completely then. I wondered if that little girl still existed somewhere inside the woman she'd become. A few days later, Clara called. Her voice was timid, fragile, like a child afraid of being scolded. Hi, Mom. Just hearing her voice again made my throat tighten. Hi, sweetheart, I whispered. It's good to hear from you. There was silence on the line, followed by a shaky breath. I'm sorry, she said softly. I know that's not enough, but I need to say it. My heart ached. You don't have to explain, Clara. Yes, I do, she insisted, her voice cracking. I was so awful to you. I thought that if I made you look smaller, somehow I'd finally feel bigger. Like I'd finally be seen for myself instead of always being your daughter. But all I did was hurt the only person who's ever really been there for me. Her words poured out between sobs, raw and unfiltered. I felt my eyes sting, tears forming before I could stop them. Oh, Clara, I whispered. You've always been seen. Maybe not in the way you wanted, but I've seen you every version of you. The brave one, the scared one, the one who wanted to conquer the world, and the one who just needed a hug. You don't have to compete with me, darling. You never did. There was a long pause. I could hear her crying softly on the other end. I don't know how to fix this, she said finally. You don't have to fix it, I said gently. You just have to be honest. With me. With yourself. We talked for nearly 2 hours that night. She told me about therapy, about how she'd been unpacking years of resentment not just toward me. She said she had built her identity around trying to prove something, and in doing so, she'd lost touch with who she really was. It wasn't easy hearing her pain, but it was honest. And honesty, no matter how jagged, is the first step toward healing. Before hanging up, she said, I don't know if you can ever forgive me. I smiled through tears. Forgiveness isn't something I give or take, Clara. It's something I live. You're my daughter. That's never going to change. When we ended the call, I sat in the dark for a long time, phone still in my hand. I didn't feel triumphant or relieved. I felt lighter. Not because everything was fixed, it wasn't, but because we had finally stopped pretending. The truth was messy, but it was real. Over the next few weeks, Clara began calling regularly. Sometimes the conversations were awkward and cautious, other times natural and warm, like they used to be years ago. I didn't push her. I let her lead. I understood now that love couldn't be forced, it had to be invited back in, piece by piece. One evening, she said something that stayed with me. Mom, she whispered. I finally understand why you worked so hard to help people. It wasn't about control, was it? I smiled. No, sweetheart. It was about hope. About giving people the chance to start again. There was a pause, and then she said softly, You gave me that too. When the call ended, I cried quietly, not from sadness but from release. For the first time in a long time, I felt like my daughter and I were standing on the same side again, not as mother and child locked in battle, but as two women learning to forgive themselves. Because forgiveness doesn't erase betrayal, it just lightens the weight. After that day, I decided my healing wouldn't depend on Clara's acceptance anymore. I loved her with all my heart, but I had spent too many years tying my worth to how she saw me. I realized that no amount of apology or regret could give me back the time I'd spent doubting myself. I couldn't change the past, hers or mine, but I could reclaim what was left of me. So I went back to where I'd always found purpose: helping others. I rejoined a mentorship program I'd once helped start, working with young women trying to rebuild their lives. Some were single mothers, others were survivors of heartbreak, addiction, or poverty. Every story I heard reminded me how fragile yet resilient the human spirit can be. These women didn't know about the humiliation I'd faced, but somehow, their courage helped me heal my own. One afternoon, I stood before a small group of them, sharing my story for the first time in years, not the polished professional version, but the raw truth. You can't live your life waiting for validation, I told them. People's opinions will change with the weather, but your value doesn't. As I spoke, I felt something lift inside me. It wasn't pride or ego, it was freedom. Clara began reaching out more consistently after that. Her texts became more frequent, her tone softer, humbler. She sent me photos of her and Aaron's new apartment, their small victories, the meals she cooked. She even started asking for my advice again about work, friendships, even the possibility of motherhood. There was a tenderness in her words that hadn't been there in years. She didn't mention the wedding though, and neither did I. Some wounds heal best in silence, and I didn't want to reopen scars just to prove a point. Instead, I chose to see her effort as enough, not because she owed me redemption, but because I was finally at peace with who I was. Whether she understood it or not. Robert and Diana stayed in touch too. They became unlikely friends, calling every few weeks to check in. Robert even asked me to consult for one of his charitable foundations, saying my experience and insight were exactly what they needed. I accepted, but more for the purpose than the recognition. Working with them gave me a chance to channel my energy into something meaningful again. At one of those meetings, Robert said something that stuck with me. You know, Evelyn, strength is quiet until someone tries to silence it. Then it becomes unstoppable. I smiled because, in that moment, I realized he was right. For so long I'd mistaken silence for humility, but now I knew there was a difference. Silence can protect peace, but it can also hide pain. I was done hiding. Months passed, and life began to feel steady again. My home felt warm, not lonely. My laughter returned, genuine and unforced. I cooked meals for myself, played old records, even joined a local book club. It wasn't a grand reinvention, it was simply living without the weight of shame. Clara came over one weekend for brunch. It was the first time she'd been in my house since before the wedding. She walked through the door slowly, her eyes scanning the familiar walls filled with photos of our old life. She stopped at one, the picture of her at 10 years old, wearing a school medal, her arm slung around me. I remember this day, she said quietly. You skipped a board meeting to come watch me. I smiled. I did, wouldn't have missed it for the world. She turned to me, guilt flickering in her eyes. I used to tell people you didn't care about those things, that you were always too busy saving everyone else. You believed that for a long time, I said softly. She nodded, her eyes watering. I know. I was wrong. We sat down at the table, and for the first time in years, we talked without defensiveness, without pretending. She told me about therapy, about how she'd discovered that her constant need for control came from fear. Fear of not being enough. Fear of being compared. Fear of failing me. I listened without judgment, because I knew how fear can twist love into something unrecognizable. At the end of our meal, she reached across the table and squeezed my hand. Thank you for not giving up on me, she said softly. I never could, I replied. You're my daughter. She smiled, and for a brief moment, I saw my little girl again, the one who used to curl up beside me on the couch and whisper, "Don't ever leave me." Mom. I realized that in many ways, she was still that child just hidden behind years of misunderstanding and pride. After that visit, I didn't expect perfection. I didn't expect every wound to vanish. What I did expect and what I got was honesty. Clara no longer tried to pretend I was someone else. She introduced me proudly to her friends as, my mom, the strongest woman I know. Each time she said it, it chipped away at the last remnants of pain inside me. I began to understand something profound. Forgiveness isn't a single moment of grace, it's a process of choosing peace every day. I didn't need to wait for her to heal me, I had already begun that journey, myself. I'd survived humiliation, betrayal, and heartbreak. But more than that, I had found my way back to the woman I used to be: strong, kind, unapologetically whole. Clara might never fully grasp the depth of the pain she caused, and that was okay. I didn't need her to. Her remorse was hers to carry. My peace was mine to protect. I had found healing on my own terms, in my own time, without anyone's permission. But just when I thought peace had settled, one final surprise awaited me. A year later, Clara called me with unexpected news: she was pregnant. Her voice trembled when she said it, and for a moment, I didn't know how to respond. My heart leapt, but fear crept in too. After everything we'd been through, I wasn't sure what role she wanted me to play in this new chapter of her life. "Mom," she said softly, almost shyly, "I wanted you to be the first to know after Aaron, of course." I smiled, tears already filling my eyes. "Oh, sweetheart, that's wonderful news." She laughed nervously. "I didn't think I'd cry telling you, but here we are." For the first time in years, her tone was warm and genuine. It wasn't strained or careful, it was full of hope. That sound alone healed something in me that words never could. Over the next few months, Clara called me regularly with updates. "Mom, the morning sickness is awful." She'd groan, and I'd laugh, remembering my own miserable pregnancy days. We'd talk about cravings, baby names, nursery themes. Slowly, the distance that had once felt impossible to bridge began to close, one small conversation at a time. She even invited me to her doctor appointments, something I hadn't expected. The first time I went, she introduced me to her doctor proudly as, "My mom, my rock." The words nearly broke me. I kept my composure, but inside, my heart ached with gratitude. By the time her baby shower came around, I felt both nervous and excited. It would be my first time seeing Robert and Diana since the wedding, though we had kept in touch occasionally. The shower was being hosted at their home, the same grand house where I'd first met them, the same place where Clara once seemed desperate to impress. When I arrived, everything was beautiful: soft pink and gold decorations, delicate pastries, laughter filling the air. But the most beautiful sight of all was Clara, standing in the middle of the room, her hands resting gently on her round belly, her eyes lighting up when she saw me. "Mom!" she exclaimed, rushing over to hug me. I froze for a second, then held her tightly, breathing her in. It was the kind of embrace we hadn't shared since she was a teenager: warm, real, full of love. "I'm so glad you're here," she whispered. "Wouldn't miss it for the world," I said, my throat thick. As the afternoon went on, guests mingled and laughed. And for once, I didn't feel out of place. There were no whispers, no forced smiles, no sideways glances. People came up to me naturally, asking about my work, talking about motherhood, even thanking me for raising such a strong woman. I could tell Clara had been telling a different story about me these days, one rooted in truth, not embarrassment. At one point, Robert came over, holding a cup of coffee and that familiar calm expression. "Evelyn," he said warmly, "it's good to see you again." "You too, Robert," I replied with a smile. "And thank you for everything. You have no idea what that moment at the wedding meant to me." He nodded. "Actually, I do. But I didn't just stand up for you that night, I stood up for Clara too. I saw a young woman trying so hard to control everything because she was terrified of losing herself. You reminded her, in your own way, that love isn't control, it's courage." His words sank deep. "Maybe," I said softly. "But she taught me something too, that even when love is wounded, it can still heal if you let it." He smiled, nodding in quiet agreement. "That's exactly why you two are going to be fine. Strong women fight hard, but they love harder." Before I could respond, Clara approached us, her face glowing. "What are you two plotting?" she teased. "Just reminiscing," Robert said, smiling. You've got quite the mother, you know. Clara turned to me, her eyes soft. I do. And I finally understand what that means. The rest of the afternoon passed like a dream. We played baby shower games, opened gifts, shared laughter. It felt almost surreal, like the universe had hit reset on our relationship. There was no tension, no resentment, just peace. Toward the end of the party, Clara pulled me aside. Mom, she said, holding my hands in hers, I've been thinking a lot about the kind of mother I want to be. And I realized something. I want to be like you. Tears immediately welled in my eyes. Oh, Clara, you don't have to be like me. Just be yourself. That's enough. She shook her head. No, Mom. You don't get it. I want my daughter to grow up knowing strength and compassion the way I did, even if I didn't appreciate it back then. I want her to see love in action. And that's what you've always shown me. Her words hit me harder than I expected. For years, I had carried guilt like a second skin, guilt for being too strong, too outspoken, too visible. And now, standing there in that moment, my daughter was telling me that those very qualities were the things she wanted to pass on. Robert, who must have overheard, walked over with a small smile. I never told you this, Evelyn, he said gently. But that night at the wedding, I wasn't just defending you. I was protecting Clara from herself. I've seen pride destroy families before. I couldn't stand by and let it happen again. I nodded slowly, tears threatening to spill. You didn't just protect her, Robert. You gave her a chance to see the truth sooner than she would have on her own. Clara squeezed my hands again, her voice trembling. Mom, she whispered, I want my daughter to meet you first. I couldn't hold back the tears anymore. I pulled her into my arms and held her tightly, both of us crying quietly. It felt like the final piece of our broken bond had clicked back into place. Later, as I helped her gather gifts and thank you notes, she placed my hand gently on her belly. She kicks every time she hears your voice, she said with a laugh. I smiled, my throat tightening. She already knows who I am. Clara looked at me then, her eyes shimmering. Mom, I want my daughter to know who you really are. And for the first time in years, I believed her. I am Evelyn Carter, a mother, a survivor, and a woman who learned that dignity doesn't need validation. It took me years to understand that the world doesn't always celebrate quiet strength. Sometimes, it mocks it. Sometimes, it misunderstands it. But strength, real strength, doesn't disappear just because someone refuses to see it. It lives quietly inside you, waiting for the moment when it's finally recognized, even if that recognition comes from within. When Clara went into labor, I was there. She'd called me at dawn, her voice trembling between fear and excitement. Mom, it's time, she said. And just like that, all the years of distance, hurt, and silence faded into nothing. I drove to the hospital with my heart pounding, praying that she would be safe. Praying that I would get the chance to see my daughter become the kind of mother she was always meant to be. When I walked into the maternity ward, she looked up at me from her hospital bed. Her hair was messy, her eyes tired but glowing. You came, she whispered, as if she hadn't expected me to. I smiled through tears. There's nowhere else I'd rather be. Hours later, I stood beside her as she brought her baby into the world. The moment I heard that first cry, I felt something inside me break open, a flood of emotion I hadn't known I was holding back. The nurse placed the baby in Clara's arms, and my daughter began to sob, not the elegant, controlled kind of crying she used to hide behind real tears. She looked at me and whispered, Mom, she's perfect. I reached out, my hand trembling, and touched that tiny bundle wrapped in soft pink cloth. The baby's skin was warm, her fingers impossibly small, her heartbeat strong and steady against my palm. In that moment, time stopped. It wasn't just a child being born, it was our second chance. Clara looked at me, her eyes red but full of peace. Mom, meet your granddaughter, Hope. Hope. The name hit me like sunlight breaking through clouds. I smiled through tears, unable to speak. That single word, hope, carried the weight of everything we'd lost and everything we'd found again. I sat beside Clara, watching her cradle her baby, and I thought about the long road that had brought us here. The bitterness, the misunderstandings, the humiliation, the silence, all of it had led to this moment of stillness, of redemption. Days later, when she came home from the hospital, I visited her again. Aaron greeted me warmly, his eyes tired but proud. The house that had once felt like a stage for appearances now felt like a home. There were toys in the corner, baby blankets draped over chairs, and laughter echoing in the halls. Clara sat on the couch with Hope in her arms, humming softly the same lullaby I used to sing to her as a child. When she noticed me, she smiled. "She sleeps better when you're here," she said. "It's like she can feel you." I sat beside her, gently stroking Hope's cheek. "Maybe she can," I said quietly. "Babies have a way of recognizing love even when they've never seen it before." Clara was quiet for a moment, then said, "I used to think you were too strong, too unbending, but now I see that strength is what love really looks like. It's not always soft or easy, sometimes it's the thing that keeps everything from falling apart." I smiled, my throat tight with emotion. "You figured that out a lot sooner than I did." We both laughed, and for the first time, it didn't feel forced. It felt like home. Over the next few months, I became a regular part of their lives. Not out of obligation, but out of genuine connection. Clara would call me for advice about feeding schedules or sleep patterns, and I'd tell her the same thing every mother learns, that there's no perfect way to love, only the honest way. One evening, while we were having dinner together, Clara said something that will stay with me forever. "I think the hardest part about growing up is realizing that our parents were just people, two people, trying to survive, trying to love the best way they could." I nodded, tears welling in my eyes. "And the hardest part about being a parent is realizing your children will one day see all your mistakes and love you anyway." She reached across the table and squeezed my hand. "I do, Mom. I really do." I looked at her then, not as my child, but as a woman. A woman who had finally found herself, who had learned from pain, who had stopped running from her own reflection. And in her eyes, I saw pride not in herself, but in me. That night, after they'd gone to bed, I stood by Hope's crib and watched her sleep. Her tiny chest rose and fell in rhythm with the universe. I thought about the legacy of women in our family, strong, imperfect, fierce in love. I realized then that this little girl would grow up in the light of something better, truth. I whispered softly, "You'll know who we are, Hope. Not because of what people say, but because of how we love." As I left the room, I felt a quiet peace settle over me. For years, I'd carried the pain of being misunderstood, of being small in the eyes of the person who meant the most to me. But now, I understood that life's cruelest moments often lead to its most beautiful truths. I no longer defined myself by what others thought. I wasn't the embarrassing mom, or the overbearing woman, or the guest in the back row. I was Evelyn Carter, a woman who had faced humiliation and met it with grace, who had been broken by love and rebuilt by it too. And in the end, I didn't need revenge, or vindication, or even an apology carved in stone. The real victory was standing tall in my own truth, surrounded by love that had once been lost, but found its way back stronger than before. When I held Hope again weeks later, she wrapped her tiny fingers around mine, and I realized what legacy truly meant. It wasn't about the name people remembered, it was about the love that lived on after you were gone. My daughter once tried to shame me in front of the world, but the world ended up seeing me for who I truly am. Not because I fought to prove it, but because the truth always has a way of rising, even when it's been buried. And that, in the end, was the greatest vindication of all.